Hello, and welcome to Self-Care is Sexy. My name is Chris, and I'll be your host. We're a weekly podcast that's here to generate and share self-care ideas with each other. Last week, I urged you to start cultivating a self-care state of mind. It's a really helpful episode if you have a hard time making the switch to self-care. So if you've missed that show, you can check us out on SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, and really anywhere you find your podcasts. I want to give you a quick preview of what to expect from today's show. Today's show is a post-election self-care guide. We're going to be talking about anxiety and self-love and give you some tips on how to decompress from all the noise and the stress of this past election cycle. And even if you're not in the States and this 2020 election didn't affect you as much, or if you're listening like way in the distant future, there are still some really great tips in today's show about how to deal with those periods of serious stressfulness. But first, we're going to get into a few quick housekeeping notes and some commercials. We'll be right back. All right, thanks for helping me pay the bills. Real quick, before we get into today's show, I did want to speak specifically about some things that I've been doing this past week for self-care. And the reason I want to share my personal self-care with you is because I really believe that there are people who really struggle, and they may listen to these ideas, they may listen to these tips, they might get excited about it, but really need help with the basic mechanics of how self-care works, how to make it sustainable, how to make it the priority when we feel this pressure to do everything else outside of us. So for me personally, the election was extremely stressful. I think, one of the things I like to reflect on is I really hope you never have to experience having your own personal civil liberties challenged every time there's an election. And for some of us where these elections really do have real life consequences to our rights and to, how we live our lives and express ourselves, it's really kind of frightening. And there's a lot at stake for everybody, but especially those of us who legislation really affects on a broad scale. So I personally took some time this past week to do a lot more self-care than I normally do. I really amped it up, and that's something I want us to start thinking about. If self-care is difficult for you, I want you to really try to remember that if you know it's difficult for you, if you've identified that taking care of yourself is not your natural default, that it's extremely important that in times of stressfulness, when there's a lot going on or chaos or something out of your control, that's when you have to amp the self-care up more than just in a maintenance mode. And for me, what that looked like is I did a lot more of my yoga practice, and I practiced with an incredible teacher that you should check out. Her name is Jessamine Stanley. She wrote an amazing book called Everybody Yoga, and she is the founder and host of an incredible organization called The Underbelly, and her yoga classes are extremely delicious and juicy for self-care and really get into the psychological benefits of yoga. So please check her out. That was something I did for yoga this week. And what that helped me do, what that kind of self-care did for me was it really maintained that kind of stepping away from the noise of this election cycle. And we're going to talk about that in some of our tips. And the reason I want to share what I've done is because, again, I want you to understand that self-care can be big. It can be something as difficult as coming to the yoga mat, which sometimes that is challenging. It's not always easy to motivate yourself to want to work out or get into postures that are a little uncomfortable and make things come up, make feelings, emotions, etc. come up. But it's such a powerful release in dealing with the things that you might not know how to deal with. So that was one thing I did. Another thing I did is I really amped up my use of essential oils. And believe me, I know how hippie woo-woo it sounds when someone says, yeah, I use essential oils for self-care. But I promise you, there's something really comforting and incredible about aromatherapy and smelling something that makes you react and make you feel good. I'm not always so concerned with my perfume or my cologne for other people. I more buy what I like to smell, which is not your traditional fragrances. So I highly recommend, if self-care is something that you struggle with, that you don't know the mechanics of, like, how do I do it, invest in a little multi-pack of essential oils and experiment with what smells good for you. I'm a big fan of doTERRA. I know a lot of folks that sell doTERRA, and I was introduced to it by my chiropractor. The chiropractor had used Deep Blue during a massage, and it just blew my mind. So I was forever hooked with that. The other thing that I did this week for my own personal self-care was my thought work. I also listen to encouraging podcasts. I read as much as I can, and I really try to feed my brain positivity to sort of combat and drown out the incredible negativity and uncertainty that's erupting from this election cycle. And so as a part of my thought work, something that I kept going back to over and over this last week is I kept asking myself, like, how can I love you better? And I would just sit with this, this is such a positive practice, you guys. It's really simple. It doesn't take much brain power, and it really does affect you. If you just sit with the question, you ask yourself first thing in the morning, before you reach for the phone, before you go potty, before your feet hit the ground, just lay in bed for just half a second longer and just say, how can I love you better today? And ask, and then, if you're really amping up your self-work, if your self-love and your self-development is a priority and you need the mechanics of how that works, then get out a journal and do some fucking work and figure this out. You are worth figuring it out. How do I need to be loved this week? How can I treat myself better this week? What can I say to myself that will help me feel better, feel encouraged, feel loved, and feel closer to myself? You've got to start being intentional with asking and thinking about self-love, because it can sound like a great concept and something that's really important and beneficial, but without the practice, you're really not going to make that transition into a more confident, more sexy, more loving state of being. And so I highly encourage you to try some of these methods. Now, if you're a little more advanced in your self-care and you're like, okay, I'm kind of in a maintenance mode where I do things that I want, I'm in control of my time, etc., then it's really important to start trying other different things you haven't tried before, because you can kind of get easily into your own routine and sort of this rut of sort of doing the same thing over and over. So when you come up against an idea that I might present today, if you're feeling a little resistant, I want you to run straight towards it. Anything that you resist, anything that's like, oh, that's scary, that's big, that's uncertain, that's unknown, go straight head for it. You're going to learn so much more than avoiding it and trying everything else to feel better. Because ultimately, self-care is really about learning the skill of comforting yourself. I really want that to resonate with my listeners. Self-care is learning the skill of comforting yourself. There are a lot of us who grew up without that basic skill set. There's a lot of parents that use the cry it out method, and the children learn how to cry themselves asleep and figure it out and self-soothe and so forth, and use their imagination and have, tools and things at their disposal. But if you grew up without that kind of preparation, soothing yourself might not be very natural. And so you have to really start to learn what soothes you, when you need the soothing, and what kind of soothing you need depending on the situation, which means you're going to have to do some work to figure that out. If nobody's ever asked you or insisted in helping you, it's super important. I just want you to keep that all in mind today while we're going over this post-election self-care. because I feel like I could give you all the tips and tricks on the planet on how to take care of yourself. But if you're really not doing the in-depth thought work, if you're really not putting the effort into it, none of these practices or ideas are going to be very helpful. It's great that you're listening to positive encouragement, and I thank you immensely for being a part of this community of contagious encouragement. It's important for us to feed our minds positive things. But if you really want the extra benefits and you really want to reach a different, calmer, more fulfilled way of being, I can attest that there is a way to get there. So the stress of this election cycle and the chaos that it's brought, the uncertainty that it's brought, the relief and the celebration for some that it's brought, and even the pain of defeat that it's brought. All of these broad things that are happening and the what ifs, and it adds to the extra pressure that we're already feeling, and it's just another layer of chaos that we have to sort of deal with and protect ourselves from while we're thinking about doing self-care and focusing on self-care. So I'm glad this week is over. It's kind of sort of over, but at least we're past the point of the stress that we can control, right? There's been a decision. There will be a transition. But even though there's still uncertainty about what's going to happen politically and for us in the coming months as a country, it's very important that we focus inward on self-care. All right, the 10 tips for post-election self-care. Number 1, turn off the social media. Look, I get it. I know you're addicted. I know that you might feel like you're missing out, but it turns out you really don't care that much about what's on Facebook. And you will give yourself the gift of time and focused and a more positive, healthy outlook if you detach yourself from social media, especially during these heightened times of highly polarized political debates. Number 2, talk to the elders. Cultivate that hope and that renewed spirit by talking with those who have gone through these kinds of tumultuous experiences here in the United States and maybe in other countries, who understand how this kind of unrest affects in the long term. Get their opinions and start asking the people you love and trust that are older that may have experienced some of this, and get some perspective on what this situation means over the long term. Because it's easy to get sucked into the minute-to-minute, soundbite-to-soundbite chaos of it all. But again, the elders have a different perspective. They have a little bit more wisdom about having gone through situations like this in our country. And although it's unprecedented and it's scary and it's uncertain and maybe they don't know, they can at least offer some guidance on how to just focus and narrow your attention to yourself, which is really important. Number 3, put your Christmas decorations up early. I mean, it's 2020. There are no rules. I was taking the dogs for a walk the other night, and I had passed by somebody's house who had a gorgeous flocked tree in their front yard with their red, white, and blue ornaments, and it just looked amazing. They had the Christmas lights all out. And the lady had happened to come out of her house as I was walking past. I said, "Oh my God, your Christmas tree looks amazing." She's like, "Yeah, my daughter just felt like, wanting to do it. So we drug them out and got it done early." And it just, it gets you in that spirit. It's something positive and fun and creative to do. And, there's no time like the present for creating a little cheer and fun. So number 4 in the list of 10 tips for post-election self-care, arts and crafts. As I said, with the Christmas decorations, something fun, glittery, creative, that always gets us in a good mood. So, get on a heartwarming movie and tune out from the chaos of the world. Believe me, it'll be there when you get back. You're not going to miss anything. And thankfully, the media does a great job of reeling it over and over and over again. So if you did miss something, you can absolutely catch up later. Number 5, get a planner and start making some power moves. All right, my BFF in the whole world got me this incredible calendar. And while I haven't really been keeping track or really looking forward because I'm not really planning for anything right now, the calendar is pictures of us from last year, all the memories that we've had throughout the year. And it actually gave me like a reason to look forward to flipping that calendar and making plans and writing things down, because even though there's a lot